Warning, this review has spoilers. Eventually. It was a good movie. That's what I thought of the first Guardians movie. It seemed, though, that everyone else around me seemed to enjoy it more than I did. Heck, I even enjoyed the soundtrack and the score more than the film itself. After seeing it, though, I did wonder what fans of the first Guardians film will think about this one. The film story is about Peter Quill discovering about the other side of his patronage. Mostly. Rocket does something dumb, which leads to the Guardians having to take on two different villains. By the end of the film, Peter comes to terms with his past and accepts his new family. Typically in sequels, going larger and more epic is the standard, but writer director James Gunn made more of a personal and at times introspective film. If you are a fan of the first film, your enjoyment will be decided on whether or not you prefer a film with more action scenes or action scenes that are more spaced out than the first film. In the first film, the Guardians had a collective character arc. None of them trusted each other at the beginning, but their relationships evolved by the end. In Volume 2, nearly every single principal character had issues with either themselves or with someone else. By the end of the film, each of those characters are farther along than they were at the start of the film. Now let's look at some pros and cons. Pro, the acting. For the most part, the acting was good. Everyone was pretty on point. The only nitpick I would make is that sometimes Zoe Saldana's delivery seemed a bit stiff. It was interesting seeing Sylvester Stallone in the film. He plays a very tiny role, but with the way that one of the end credits scenes ends, you could see a possibility that it's setting up a possible Ravagers movie with him. Yondu and Drax were two of my favorite characters in the film, followed by Mantis. Michael Rooker owned just about every scene he was in. His scenes with Rocket were probably the best in the entire film. Over one scene, they were able to bond with each other, and he gave some expository history about himself, which allowed the audience to really get to know Yondu and his motivations. Usually, I prefer the show don't tell type of storytelling, but just as with Doctor Strange, Michael Rooker gave such a vulnerable and powerful performance that listening to him tell his story and imagining it was better than actually seeing it. Also, Taserface. Really, James Gunn? Really? With Yondu, they went back to the 1960s and 70s Guardians series. With Taserface, they went back to the 1990s version, the first Guardians series that I actually read. I just laughed when he popped up, and I'm glad that everyone else in the film found his name as silly as I did. Finally, Dave Bautista. Dear Hollywood, why can't you direct him as well as James Gunn has? This is the second film, and Drax is the comedy relief, but he's also the heart of the film. We got to learn more about Drax, and he's possibly the most interesting character in this film, and of a film that has tons of interesting characters. As far as the action, while I found the action serviceable, my favorite action scene was when the Ravagers were trying to ambush Rocket, Groot, and Nebula. It was hilarious how Rocket took out most of them. Other than that, I didn't feel that there was any real standout set pieces like in the first film with the Nova Corps linking up. Also, Peter's final fight, the tension was gone because one, he's the main character, so he probably won't die. Two, a couple months ago, Marvel Studios released an Infinity War first look and Chris Pratt was on site. The fight was paced okay, but it wasn't that interesting, and not many of the action scenes were that interesting, other than the Groot one and the opening set piece. And now for some cons. This film is probably 95% CGI, and for the most part it was okay, but there were some parts where it just looked fake. This film also comes in 3D, and I saw it in regular digital, but I could tell where the 3D scenes were supposed to be, and some of the scenes, 3D scenes, they looked okay. Other times they looked like you were poking your finger at the screen. Now, those scenes, however, seemed few and far between, so I didn't really see the point of having 3D to begin with. As far as the villains go, there's two, maybe three. One just seemed to be there in order to push the story along. We don't get that much character development from them. And I understand that they come from a very prideful race, but that's the extent of their personality. Now, the other villain, Ego, first comes off as a friend, but since this is a sci-fi film and it needs a villain, and this character becoming a villain later on was pretty obvious. Then again, once I heard that this character was added to the film, I knew he was going to be the antagonist. After all, if he gave Thor problems in the comics, I doubt that he would be an ally in this film. One of the strongest parts of the film is the acting and the emotion in any given scene. And while I like the emotional component of the film, I get the feeling that the scenes that I thought worked better weren't the same ones that the filmmakers thought. Some of the comedy fell flat. The death of a certain supporting character was basically telegraphed strongly. That said, their death did have some weight because personally I think they were one of the best characters in the film. Also, the inclusion of a certain video game character in the final fight just made me roll my eyes and groan. Music-wise, the soundtrack wasn't bad, it was just okay. Actually, the songs during the credits were a whole lot better than I feel the songs during the rest of the film. Also, you want to sit through the credits. Yeah, there's some credit scenes, but also the music, and there's interactive credits during the credits. I would, however, put the soundtrack on par with Suicide Squad from last year. Please don't throw rocks at me. I like the film and I like the soundtrack from last year. The score never really stood out in any scene to me, unlike the previous film. It felt pretty generic. I loved the first score so much that I played it more than the soundtrack. What's weird is that the score from the first film and this film were scored by the same person, Tyler Bates. I don't know what happened with him this time. With all that being said, I do recommend this film. This was a good film. Personally, I say it's about on par with the first one. The only difference is it had a different tone and aim than its predecessor. Fans of the first film should like this film, but if they don't, it's probably because the first film was such a phenomenon that a sequel didn't really have a chance to live up to it. To me, this film was like the first Avengers film. It had decent action, but to me what really stood out were the interpersonal connections everyone had. Even though I sounded a bit more negative in this review, basically I have are just nitpicks. And now here are some random thoughts I had during the film. Also, spoilers. Howard the Duck appears twice in this film and he even has a funny line. Astro the astronaut dog makes an appearance, and Uatu and the Watchers pop up while Stan as a spaceman rambles off to them. This told me that when Marvel made a deal, I believe it was late last year with Fox to let Fox should have their Marvel characters appear on TV, what Marvel got back were some use of the Fox Marvel characters. Like other than the Skrull, not much was known. Now we know they also have the Watchers. So who else does Marvel now have access to? I guess it would be too much to ask to have the Fantastic Four back, I suppose. Fox will never give up the X-Men though. I like that when we see Ego's planet several times in the film and how it looks like it is in the comics. We even get the Ego face. Now, Adam Warlock initially was in one of the pods in the Collector's Place in the previous film, but at the end of the film this time, the Gold Lady says that they're suddenly creating him. Now, this seems to either be a continuity error or a plot hole. Dear Marvel Studios, don't become like Fox and just not pay attention to continuity. Also, I noticed one of the trailers I saw before the film was for a Japanese anime called My Hero Academia. Now, before I saw Ghost in the Shell, they also showed a trailer for Attack on Titan Season 2, along with a trailer for Final Fantasy 15. I like the variety of showing different trailers like that. I hope it keeps going in the future. This can make people more interested in finding out about these series and maybe get into Japanese anime. Now, hopefully someday there will be a movie trailer preview of comic books. Nah, that's asking for too much. Once again, we have several multiple credit scenes, but they really don't lead into Thor Ragnarok or Infinity War. I wonder what other people will think about the credit scenes. Some people may just go with the flow and enjoy it, and other people will just be confused. Now, here are some questions I had during the film. 1. If Ego was a Celestial and the Celestials still possibly exist in the universe based off of the first Guardians film when they went to the Collector, how come Ego hasn't ever met his own kind? After millions of years, you would think that they would have run into each other at some point. 2. Peter is half celestial, right? So even though he lost his powers at the end of the film, he's still half God, right? So in the next film or in the Avengers Infinity War or Infinity Gauntlet, they're just not going to forget about this, right? This will play a part in defeating Thanos, right? And 3. After having his cassette player destroyed, Peter gets a Zune. Was that wise? That's going to date this film more than the cassette player. The cassette player has some nostalgia to it. In about a year or two, no one will remember the Zune. And that's it for what I have for this review. If you enjoyed it or hate it, please comment below. If you found it interesting, please subscribe and share the video as well. Thank you for listening and have a good day.